The attic smelled like cedar and dusted time. Boxes of old tools, jars of screws, a rocking chair missing an arm. I'd spent all day sorting through my grandfather's things: war medals, yellowed maps, a collection of moth-eaten pocket squares, until I found the false drawer under his writing desk. It popped open with a sigh like old lungs and dropped something heavy onto the floorboards. A notebook bound in cracked leather, edges darkened like it had been singed and saved. The first page was written in the thin, meticulous cursive I remembered from birthday cards. No greeting, no title, just a line drawn under neat letters that read, "Rules for Surviving the Night." Below that, 10 numbered entries, the first already smudged by fingerprints. 1. When the dark comes before the hour, bar every door and window. 2. Once light fails, do not trust reflections. 3. If you hear someone downstairs, don't answer until sunrise. 4. When you start to see the others, keep reading these rules. The ink wavered halfway through, the nib cutting deep as if his hand had begun shaking. In the corner, he'd added a date, June 17, 1953. That was the year our town lost power for 3 nights, and everyone older than 50 refused to talk about it. My first thought was dementia, the kind that folds superstition into memory. My second was curiosity, the dangerous kind he and I shared. I thumbed ahead through blank pages that weren't blank for long. Moisture from my fingers brought faint gray text to the surface, like writing beneath old thermal paper. The letters rearranged until a new line appeared beneath Rule 4. If you found this, the night has found you. The attic lights flickered once, twice, then stayed out. When the bulbs came back, their light looked weaker, almost filtered through amber glass. I told myself it was wiring. His old house survived on a skeleton of patched-in circuits, but I still carried the notebook downstairs like it mattered. The farmhouse creaked the way it always had, a wood-ribbed body settling on its haunches after too many winters. I'd been living here for 3 weeks, sorting the estate, preparing to sell what no one wanted. My life beyond these fields had shrunk to a rented storage unit in town and a string of ignored job offers. Maybe I'd hoped the house would tell me something about him, or about why he chose silence at the end. All I found were mysteries carved in cedar and paper. Daylight brought calm. I stacked split wood by the stove, scrubbed rust from the range, and laughed at the notebook whenever its corner peeked accusingly from the counter. I even checked under the sink for gas leaks, a sensible explanation for last night's blackout. Everything tested fine. By late afternoon, the house had returned to its stubborn normal. Wind in the chimney, robins on the fence, a smell of coffee so burned it was reassuring. Only then did I notice the shutters. Heavy black panels folded into the walls on brass hinges, each window fitted for total seal. They weren't decorative, they were defenses. Granddad had kept them greased. The bolts slid smooth when I tested them. Why would a man who loved open fields fortify his house like a bunker? The generator in the shed was newer, a diesel model from less than a decade ago, wired into its own transfer switch. He'd maintained it meticulously. I found extra fuel drums labeled Blackout Kit A through D. Every precaution screamed paranoia, but it was meticulous paranoia, the kind that expects an encore. I brought the notebook back inside, set it by the window where the sunset painted everything blood orange, and forced myself to keep reading. Half the remaining rules were nonsense. Wind can knock, don't knock back. Others read like instructions for electrical failure. Practical, almost comforting. If nothing else, they showed a man trying to survive some forgotten terror. Outside, clouds gathered over the pasture. The cattle 2 fences down began shifting restlessly, snorting at shadows that hadn't moved all day. A low tremor hummed through the floorboards. Just the generator testing itself, I told the empty room. When I shut the notebook, I could swear I heard the pages settle with a breath, in, then out, as dust plumed from their edges, slow and deliberate, as if the book exhaled through paper lungs. At dinner, my mother stirred sugar into her tea until it looked like lake ice and said nothing. She'd driven up that afternoon to collect photos for the memorial service, the sort of task she excelled at, everything neat, labeled, harmless. It took half an hour before I said, "Did Grandpa ever talk about 1953? The spoon stopped mid-circle. Quiet click. "That wasn't his year to talk about," she said finally. "There was a blackout, right? 3 nights? He wrote something about it in a notebook I found." Her gaze went to the kitchen window. She didn't look at the glass, though. She looked at the shutter folded beside it. "Don't open that book after dark," she said. "You think you're reading him, but it reads you just as careful." I laughed to relieve the chill in her voice. "It's just superstition." "You think I don't know that?" She knocked the teaspoon twice against the cup rim, a rhythm that sounded practiced. 2 taps, pause, 1. "He started that habit after the nightfall. Everyone did for a while. We'd sit with the windows shuttered, waiting for daybreak the way other families wait for mail." She told me only a little more. The power grid failed over 3 counties, searchlights from the city vanished, and the sky stayed black even during supposed daylight hours. When dawn finally came, 27 people were missing, including half the volunteer fire crew. Official report blamed weather inversion and hysteria. People rebuilt, but no one forgot where the horizon had been. I asked what had happened those nights, really. She smiled, a brittle mimicry of softness, and said, "There's a reason your grandfather never replaced the mirrors he broke." Then she added, almost gently, "If the dark comes too early today, don't call me until morning." She left before sunset, taillights shrinking down the gravel road. The farmhouse felt taller without her, every beam flexing as wind crawled its length. I poured another cup of her cold tea, trying to ignore the reflection sitting in it. When I looked closer, the rippling surface showed her face still across from me, lips moving against sound. I pushed the cup away so hard it tipped. The splash hit the counter, steam still rising, and in that thin gray fog, a single line flickered, copying her tone perfectly. "Don't read too far tonight." The letters vanished with the steam. I wiped the counter clean until wood showed through, but the scent of burnt sugar lingered, sharp and invasive. That's when I realized every window in the kitchen already had its shutters closed. I hadn't closed them. I hadn't heard them move at all. The storm came fast and without a forecast. Around 6 p.m., the light outside fell forward instead of down, rolling off the field in a curtain so dense it looked physical. 1 minute, late afternoon gold. Next, bruised twilight. No sunset in between. At first, I thought the transformer on the road had blown. The lamps dimmed, flickered, died. Not even the clock on the stove flashed 12 o'clock. The phone screen stayed black no matter how long I pressed the button. Solar flare? Grid surge? The world had a new way of saying no. Inside the dark, the notebook waited where I'd left it, open. I caught enough window glow to read the top rule again. When night arrives too quickly, bolt every door. The dark travels faster than you think. I laughed once, a noise smaller than comfort. Then the shutters rattled as if to ask what was funny. The air changed. I wish I could describe it better. How darkness can feel heavy without warmth, how it presses even where you can't see it. The nearest trees disappeared first, swallowed whole. But the horizon never went completely blank. The black shimmered, starless but alive. Something moved out there, not light but texture, a slick rotation like murmurations of ink. Instinct won over disbelief. I slammed the front and back latches, dragged the old cedar chest across the entryway. Every window bolt slid home smoother than it should, like the frames were oiled for this event. The house settled around the sound. Groan, sigh, lock. Then came the scrape. Soft, deliberate, metal on wood. Someone or something testing shutters from outside. Each window in turn. 3 short drags, a pause, then the next. It circled the house clockwise, slow enough for footsteps if footsteps still existed. When it reached the kitchen wall, close enough that I could hear nails glide along paint. The generator in the shed coughed alive on its own. The lights flickered, yellow and trembling, revealing the notebook now open to a different page. Words glowed faintly like phosphor. 5. If you hear scraping, do not respond. The darkness traces vibration. Right then, something tapped 3 times on the glass behind me, my rhythm on the cup from earlier. 2 taps, pause, 1. My mother's little code. It sounded softer than knuckles, more like wood echoing through wood. I didn't check the window. I just whispered, "Not tonight," and forced myself to count. Each number felt like a breath the house and I shared. At 300, the scraping stopped. When I risked a look, every shutter still sat closed, untouched. But across the wood grain below the kitchen window, 3 grooves had appeared, evenly spaced, deep as claw marks, smoking gently in the dim yellow light. Morning arrived sharp and colorless, the air cold enough to bite the inside of my nose. I hadn't truly slept, just dozed upright in the hallway chair, notebook clutched like a will. When light finally leaked through the cracks, it was clean and unbothered, as if the night hadn't even happened. I almost convinced myself it was nerves until I saw the mirror. The old hallway glass stood opposite the staircase, a heavy antique framed in tarnished brass. Granddad had draped it in a lace cover years ago, maybe to hide the silver flaking. The cloth lay on the floor now. The mirror wasn't dusty, it was fogged from the inside. Gets colder at night, fog's normal. That was my thought, until the fog shifted sideways, slow, on the inside of the glass, not the surface. I leaned close enough to leave a breath print. The spot cleared, an oval of reflection just large enough to see my face, or the rough sketch of it. But behind my reflection, the background was wrong. The hallway lamp that should have been off burned bright in the reflections world. The angle of the stairs behind me curved like a question mark, bending subtly wrong. And there was someone else down there, halfway behind the first landing, head tilted up, as though waiting for me to notice. Too tall, too still. Rule 2 waited in the notebook. Avoid mirrors after sundown. They forget who's in charge. I told myself it was morning now, bright as could be, but the words blurred wetly across the page anyway, ink running sideways, as if the rule wanted to remind me it applied whenever the mirror remembered night. It took every ounce of sense to throw a sheet over the frame and keep walking. I tried destroying it, lifting it off the hook, but it might as well have been welded to the wall. As the cloth fell back into place, I caught one last glimpse around the edge, my reflection still visible despite being fully covered, hand raised in delayed imitation a second after mine. Downstairs, spoons in the drying rack trembled, lightly clinking against one another, catching glimpses of that same wrong hallway in their curves. Every reflection in the house had gone restless, stainless steel, glass, even the dark polish on the stove. I duct-taped paper over every bit of shine I could find. When I reached the bathroom, the mirror there was already cracked, a new fracture running perfect vertical down the middle, as if something beneath had tried to pry it open. Behind the split, human eyes blinked once, backwards, pupils dilating instead of shrinking. I slammed the door, heart somewhere in my throat, and dragged the dresser across, locking it in. My breath fogged the window. Within the haze, 3 backward words appeared, slow, deliberate, and written from the inside of the glass. Who reads you? By afternoon, the house looked ridiculous. Mirrors draped, pots taped with paper, TV screen face down on the carpet, but nerves didn't care how it looked. I needed evidence or sanity, maybe both. The rules worked once. Maybe they were psychological placebo, tiny rights that convinced fear to stay outside. That's what I told myself driving into town. The valley road shimmered beneath heat that shouldn't have existed in late autumn. The radio kept spitting quiet bursts of static between songs, always at the same lyric, the moment night came up in the words. When I pulled into Lawson's Gas and Feed, the pumps blinked error. Inside, no one. Cash drawer open, still stocked. fluorescent tubes flickering in the rhythm of a heartbeat. All clocks read 3:21 p.m. The air smelled faintly metallic, ozone and pennies. Phone camera in hand, I turned a slow circle. Every reflective surface, from the cooler doors to the window glass, appeared fogged over from the inside, gray, not white, as if depth itself had curdled. Through one patch of clarity, I saw the town square, silent. The wind pushed leaves but not sound. It was like visiting a photograph. I reached for my phone to timestamp a shot. The battery, full a minute ago, read 47%. I snapped a photo anyway. The screen captured an image maybe half a second delayed. My arm was still raising the phone in the reflection when I'd already lowered it in reality. Over my shoulder, on the small screen, someone else stood by the gasoline display. A thin man wearing my grandfather's ranger jacket. Turned away, head tilted, listening. The next blink removed him. The temperature dropped 5 degrees in my skin. I drove home too fast. Clouds rolled backward, west to east, dragging shadows wrong way across the fields. When I reached the porch, the sun sat high yet somehow fading at the edges, as if burnout replaced setting. Inside, the mantel clock's hands spun counterclockwise once and stopped square at midnight. My phone chimed a calendar alert. June 17th, 1953. Remind later or delete. The notebook lay on the table, open, pages breathing gently as warm air from the vents made them ripple. Lines of script glowed faintly under the lamplight, black ink bleeding silver. 2 words had underlined themselves. Midnight is not always at 12. A low hum started somewhere between the floorboards and my ribs, like the old generator coughing to life. I went for the window to check the shed, but the light outside shifted too fast, snapping from gold to blue to black, no dusk between. In the glass, I saw the road still sunlit, and my reflection staring into darkness. When the power clicked off entirely, the notebook turned a page by itself. Its next heading, just visible in the weak starlight, read, Rule number 7, you're already late. The hum came from under the floor this time, steady, rhythmic, mechanical, but wrong in pitch. I followed it room to room until I realized it wasn't the generator at all. The sound rose through the vent over the cellar door. Granddad's note for the 5th rule floated through my mind. Never enter the basement unless the grinder stops. The hum deepened into that exact register, a grinding whir softened by dust and years. I grabbed a flashlight and my own disbelief for courage, then pulled open the door. Cold air breathed out first, sharp enough to sting my eyes. The stairwell smelled of iron and rancid timber. I stepped down slow, counting the squeaks from each tread. 7 to reach the packed earth floor. At the far end of the cellar sat an antique meat grinder bolted to a stone work table. It had no power cord, no hand crank, nothing that could make it turn. And yet it did, the gears rotating lazily against one another, as though worked by unseen muscle. Each revolution sank deeper into that subsonic hum until the shelves trembled with it. The flashlight flickered. I told myself the vibration was shaking the bulb. Then I noticed the pattern carved into the concrete beneath the table. Concentric circles cut shallow, the grinder bolted tight at their center. Inside each ring, numbers marched outward, dates, decades apart, all stopping at 1953. Rule 3 in the notebook had read, if the grinder halts, do not move until dawn. The idea of waiting in darkness with the thing alive around me was worse than breaking the rule. I called up the stairwell. Anybody here? The hum stuttered, stopped. Silence can be heavier than noise. It fell so fast that the air itself felt vacuumed away. I could hear every thread of my heartbeat and something else above it. Slow, deliberate footfalls, pacing the kitchen directly overhead. I froze halfway up the stairs. The footsteps reached the cellar door. The latch creaked, pressed, hesitated. I forced myself not to breathe. The door didn't open, but the light from the gap under it dimmed as though something leaned against it, blocking the world away. The notebook lay warm in my jacket pocket. Its spine pulsed like a heartbeat trying to sync with mine. A whisper slid down the stairwell, wood carrying sound in reverse. It was my name, stretched thin through grinding metal, every syllable turning like a gear. I closed my eyes and whispered back, "Stop." For a moment, it did. Then the grinder shrieked once, a metal scream that clawed every nail on every shelf. Lights flared from nowhere, strobing just long enough for me to see impressions pressed into the dirt around the table. Bare feet, large, overlapping, walking up toward me. When darkness swallowed the flash, the hum resumed, slower now, like heavy breathing caught mid-dream. I climbed the last 2 steps, reached the door handle, and felt warmth radiating from the metal, skin warm, as if the hand that had waited there a moment ago had left the temperature of the living behind. I didn't open the cellar door again that night. I sat with my back to it until morning, flashlight trembling between my knees, counting each breath just to prove the world still took them in rhythm. When daylight finally pushed under the threshold, it was thin, watery, unconvincing, but enough to make me move. The notebook had cooled again, stiff and ordinary. At the back cover, I noticed a small square bulge beneath the end paper. With shaking fingers, I peeled it up. A microcassette slid into my palm, label cracked. The ink bled to almost nothing except 2 letters, GK. Upstairs, I rummaged until I found my grandfather's tape recorder, a plastic relic of the 70s, battery compartment taped shut. It hissed the moment I pressed play, the kind of hiss that sounds like wind traveling through history. Then his voice broke through, shaky but calm, the same steady cadence he used when teaching me to gut fish. If you're hearing this, the lights are probably gone. That's when it listens best. Don't waste candles, heat draws it faster. The response was a parallel sound, breaths between words, ragged, almost echoing him. They say Nightfall 53 was the only one. They're wrong. It comes when we forget how to keep dark still. The rules aren't superstition, they're insulation. Pages turned near the microphone, metallic clicking underneath, the grinder unmistakably. He coughed, low and wet. I tried sealing it in scripture, didn't work. Paper's good, it soaks the sound, but it needs new blood to hold ink. That's why the rules rewrite themselves. They're just copying voices, yours now. A thin laugh, not his. Then quieter. Tell the next one not to follow the lights under the ground. They aren't stars. The tape garbled, reversed itself, hissed a squeal, then stabilized again. If the basement stops before you finish this message, don't go upstairs. That means it's already inside. Keep reading loud until sunrise. His voice faded beneath a new one, my own, just off key, speaking the same sentence half a second behind. Keep reading loud until sunrise. Click. Tape end. For a long time, all I could do was stare at the recorder, watching the reels spin nothing. Somewhere under the floor, the grinder coughed once, a hard clunk of jammed metal working itself free. Dust rattled through the air vent as though the house exhaled after hearing itself on tape. I don't remember deciding to write, but my pen was in hand, notebook open, new words forming without me. Rule 14, always finish listening. I hadn't made it halfway through the sentence before the basement hum steadied again, slow, rhythmic, satisfied, exactly keeping time with the turning reels that should have stopped 15 minutes ago. The next sunset came too fast again. One blink, the fields were amber, the next, burnished black velvet. Even the crickets cut out mid-note, leaving a vacuum where noise had been. I sat at the kitchen table, the notebook open to the newest rule, the cassette recorder still wheezing faint static. Outside, the generator kicked itself alive without my hand on the switch. The basement's pulse joined it, slow, patient, like 2 hearts syncing. I told myself I would stay upstairs, just watch, record, keep every rule intact. But rules work only when you understand their logic, and I didn't anymore. Every window pane shivered, as if dust motes were beating wings on the other side of glass. In the silence between those faint taps, I heard the same sound against the front door. 3, then 4 knocks. I froze. The notebook fluttered a page and highlighted a paragraph in gray shadow. Rule 7. At the 3rd knock, open only if it's your own voice. The 4th knock came anyway. Then, pause. A long, aching quiet. From the porch, my voice called, low and hoarse. "It's cold. Please let me in." You never understand terror completely until you hear yourself begging for entry from the wrong side of a locked door. The tone was perfect, breath pattern exact. Even the same habit of choking the final word, the way I do when I'm lying. "Come on," the voice tried again, softer now, mournful. "You're me. I'm you. One of us belongs in." The metal latch flexed against its fitted screws. I backed away until my shoulders hit the china cabinet. The notebook's pages turned like restless fingers until they stopped on new handwriting. Fresher ink curling up at the edges as it dried. "Don't break sequence. Keep reading." So I did. I read every rule aloud, each sentence like building a wall from words. Never trust reflections. Stay silent in accelerating darkness. Bar the cellar door. Each rule I recited pushed the knocks further apart. But at Rule 10, they answered again, slower, heavier. The voice outside laughed low, not mocking, affectionate, the way family might. "You sound just like him," it said. "I am him," I whispered, before realizing that the recorder's static had picked up the line, replayed it in perfect mimicry, then whispered it back. The door hinge groaned once, protesting no weight at all. In that half-open breath, something slid, a folded sheet through the gap. Yellow paper, lined, frayed on one edge. I stared at it until my knuckles turned white. The handwriting was neat, practiced, almost familiar. New rule. When your voice comes knocking, let it finish the sentence. As I bent to pick it up, the words rearranged themselves, fading and rewriting between blinks until they formed something worse. "Now, open the door." The handle felt colder than metal should, cold like subtraction, drawing the heat straight through my palm. I didn't mean to turn it. Curiosity just doesn't ask permission. The notebook thudded shut behind me at the exact moment the latch clicked free. The porch was empty. No wind, no snow, no proof that something had been there at all. Only the smell of old paper and oil hung in the air, heavier with each breath, as if the notebook itself had followed me outside. I lifted the flashlight toward the fields. Light spread no farther than 10 feet and ran out like water hitting glass. "Hello?" My voice sounded muted, softened by distance that wasn't there. The darkness beyond the beam undulated slightly, a slow inhale that made snowmelt pool around my boots, even though the air was below freezing. A second me exhaled from it, shape first, then tone. My reflection crawling free from somewhere that shouldn't connect to this world. It smiled with my own uncertainty. Between us, the notebook lay open in the snow, pages fluttering, though the wind was absent. Writing still formed as I watched, letters rising black out of white drifts. Rule 8. When the page writes for you, stop reading. The duplicate reached down, fingers splayed, and started turning those pages with delighted curiosity. Each rule it touched vanished, erased mid-sentence, replaced by the word rewrite. The letters burned faintly red, heat scattering frost into steam. "Don't," I managed, voice too thin to belong to anything solid. It looked up, eyes wide like a child caught reading somebody's diary. "Someone has to," it said, a cadence that wasn't imitation anymore, but authorship. My mouth moved in time with its words. The conversation looped before I could think them. I backed up to the threshold. The duplicate mirrored me perfectly until the instant my heel hit the doorway. Then it stopped, head tilted, smile fading as polite limits became borders again. It pressed a hand against invisible glass separating porch from house. Frost spiderwebbed under its palm, spelling letters backward through freezing condensation. Rewrite. The world inside the word bent inward, sucking light toward it like a drain. I slammed the door, but the latch burst from its housing with the force of a heartbeat. The book flew off the table, hitting the floor spine first. Dust poured from it thicker than smoke. When the air cleared, a single phrase glowed across the open pages. The story needs a body. Every lamp flared at once, wide enough to blind. When vision returned, my breath no longer steamed. The house was warm, unnaturally so, breathing comfort into my skin. The notebook shut itself gently, almost affectionately, and settled back on the table. Across its cover, in raised script that hadn't been there before, a new title had appeared. Not Rules for Surviving the Night anymore. Rules for Finishing It. The morning after felt counterfeit. Sunlight poured in too bright, too fast, as if the world had been repainted overnight with colors that didn't quite belong. Birds called outside, recognizable songs, slightly off-tempo, like recordings played at half speed. I stood on the porch expecting frozen fields. Instead, wet green grass rippled out to the tree line. The snow had vanished, not melted, vanished. The air smelled newborn and wrong. A convoy of county trucks rumbled along the highway, men in neon vests waving me down. One shouted through a megaphone, "Power's back! We're restoring phone lines!" I wanted to ask how many days, but my throat refused to choose the right number to guess. They said the outage lasted a single night. My watch read Friday. My phone jumped between Thursday and Sunday like a restless animal refusing a leash. In town, people looked hungover from a dream they'd agreed never to mention. Mrs. Keller, who ran the post office, grinned too wide when I walked in. "You missed quite a concert, honey," she said. "That thunderstorm last night shook us right back into the 50s. Everyone laughed on cue. My skin crawled. On the community board behind her, a printed notice read, "June 17th, nightfall, reenactment canceled until further notice." Someone had written, "Again?" in red marker beside it. I asked if she remembered the blackout. Her smile wavered and reset. "Wasn't so bad. We all just lost a day." Then quieter, almost to herself, "Only one this time." At the diner, the cook swore the clock had stopped for 7 hours, then restarted mid-tick. He called it time hiccup. When I pressed him for details, he flashed a strange look at my jacket pocket, the corner of the notebook peeking out. "You found it, didn't you?" he said. "You shouldn't read past Rule 10. That's when it writes you in." "How do you know about the rules?" I asked. He rubbed his hands on his apron. "We all did, back when it started. Your granddad printed the first batch." That single sentence pushed everything sideways. The rules weren't a private diary. They had been distributed. I left my coffee untouched and drove toward the library. The neon open sign buzzed unnaturally bright. Inside, shelves stood bare except one display near the history desk. A local flyer titled Town Heroes, 1953. Front and center, my grandfather's photo. The caption read, "Compiled safety guidelines saved the valley from unexplained blackout panic." A line below it, in finer print, said, "Revised editions published intermittently by successors." Someone had scrawled a note in pencil across the laminated glass. Who edits the editor? Next to it, smeared as if by an oily thumb, 3 letters still visible in the dust. G. Hay. The notebook in my pocket warmed. When I opened it right there, a new sentence curled beneath Rule 10. Handwriting, younger, mine, yet not mine. Second edition pending, approval required. And beside the margin, faintly embossed into the paper, an old stamp mark read, "Property of Hollow County Records Division." The seal dated 2023. I drove home with the notebook open on the passenger seat, the pages fluttering though every window was closed. Words shifted like fish beneath moving water, sentences elongating, shrinking, occasionally dissolving into lines of numbers. Somewhere around mile marker 18, I realized the handwriting wasn't my grandfather's anymore, and it wasn't mine either. It was learning a new hand in real time, curves evening out into printing fit for a manual. At the kitchen table, I spread old photos beside the notebook, trying to match strokes of ink to faces. The penmanship on the newest lines was flawless, mechanical, almost bored. I flipped to the back page. A signature waited there. Not GK as I expected. My own name, full and clean, followed by a date that wouldn't arrive for another month. Beneath it, approved for release, 2nd edition. The paper felt warm, faintly electrical. I fetched a magnifying glass. Under close focus, each black letter was made of smaller letters, repeating the same words in miniature, spiraling inward until the strokes turned illegible. Self-replicating ink. That's when I noticed the watermark. Mass-produced, not handmade, each page marked Hollow County Press. Granddad hadn't simply written a warning, he'd started a publication. The reflection in the oven door caught my motion, and I nearly dropped the glass. The mirrored version of the notebook sat a page ahead, already open to a section I hadn't seen yet. In it, the script scrawled across a header, Rule 0, every story seeks survival. Beneath, a paragraph appeared only in the reflection. The first writer writes to remember. The second writes to repeat. The third writes to recruit. My pulse thudded behind my eyes. I turned the book over, blank. Looked back at the reflection, ink alive again, line changing, adjusting for my breath. Now it read, You're our third. The kitchen clock hiccuped, gears skipping in time with my heart. Every appliance hum sharpened, across the same tone as the grinder in the basement. The notebook's pages lifted of their own accord, snapping to blank sections that filled themselves with headings. Distribution list, pending, and under that, my own address. The overhead light blinked once. In the dull gleam of the bulb, a silhouette appeared on the page, a seated figure bent over a desk, writing. Every twitch of my wrist matched its movements a half-second later. Only one thing didn't match. The pen in its hand was already finished with the line I was still shaping. I closed the notebook, but the scratching continued from inside the cover, delicate and patient, like a tiny writer still filling footnotes. Each pause left a short gasp of air, as though the book was turning its own pages one last time before print.